All right, Dr. Benjamin, I'm going to share my screen and can start in 3, 2, 1.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to be here. I'm Georges Benjamin. I'm the Executive Director of the American Public Health Association and a member of the Research America Board. I'm your moderator for today's discussions on fostering patient engagement, a catalyst for research innovation. On this session of the 2024 National Health Research Forum, we'll focus on the important role of patient engagement across the research ecosystem. I'm pleased to introduce our panelists for today's discussion. We have Erika Bilger, who currently serves as the Director of Research Advocacy for Fight Colorectal Cancer, for short as Fight CRC. She was diagnosed at age 22 with stage 4 colon cancer. Erika has lived over half her life as a survivor and knows firsthand the importance of research into the causes of early onset disease and colorectal cancer prevention and treatment, as well as survivorship issues specific to young patients and survivors. And before serving as a Director of Research Advocacy for Fight CRC, Erika was a research scientist in freshwater ecology and a college biology instructor. We're also joined today by Dr. Katie Robertson. Dr. Robertson is a Disease Area Network Lead for Oncology at Roche Diagnostics. She leads a team that provides disease area expertise and clinical input into medical strategies across pathology and sequencing for oncology. I want to thank you both for joining me today. We're here to discuss the critical role of patients across the research ecosystem and the ways that researchers and patient advocates are working to engage and uplift the patient voice in research. So maybe we'll start with Dr. Robinson. Dr. Robinson, you bring a unique perspective to this conversation. Being in the diagnostic space, patients who experience adverse health outcomes are often engaged with your work early in their patient journey. From your perspective, why is it important for patients to understand the diagnostic landscape? And then how can we help improve early detection and long-term patient outcomes?
Thank you, Dr. Benjamin. And I would like to first thank Research America for inviting me here today. It's been a great day so far and can't wait to see the next sessions. So I'm going to start off with your first question, the importance for patients to understand diagnostic landscape. Well, I think it's important for everyone to understand the diagnostic landscape. So if we just take a step back, biomarkers are supremely important to understand. So 70% of today's medical decisions really depend on laboratory test results. So it really shows the important role of clinical labs in today's healthcare system. There's something like 14 billion laboratory tests that are ordered annually. So safety, quality, and cost effectiveness in laboratory testing, it's really required for effective diagnosis and treatment of disease. And I just want to level set on what actually is a biomarker. So it's really a measurable indicator of what is happening in a person's body at a particular moment in time. So that can be molecular, such as hormone, metabolites, histological, proteins, antibodies, radiographic, MRI, X-rays, or even physiological, like temperature, heart rate, and brain waves. And they're not just used for one thing. So biomarkers are used for routine screening, symptom evaluation, monitoring disease progression, or treatment response. And there's really different categories. So it's really important that a patient understands, what biomarkers are being tested, because there's two categories that I'm going to focus on that can cause some confusion. And people have probably heard of their names: prognostic biomarkers and predictive biomarkers. So prognostic biomarkers are used to identify the increased or decreased likelihood of a future clinical event, disease recurrence, or worsening of a condition in individuals with a particular medical condition. And prognostic biomarkers can often be used as eligibility requirements in clinical trials, as they enable the identification of participants who are more likely to experience disease progression or clinical events throughout the course of a clinical trial. And then there's predictive biomarkers, and these are equally important because predictive biomarkers essentially inform treatment benefits. So these biomarkers can also be a target for therapy. So we can use them to identify patients and individuals who are more likely to respond, whether that means symptomatic benefits, improved survival rates, or even adverse effects when exposed to a specific medical product. Of course, benefit is never guaranteed, even if predictive biomarkers are identified. But it's important to know biomarkers because the very first step, and I'm going to use the cancer journey as an example, the timing of diagnosis can majorly impact the outcome. So we know that early stage cancer diagnosis is associated with higher survival rates, better care experiences, lower treatment morbidities, and improved quality of life. So getting tested as early as possible in your patient journey is critical for your long-term outcomes.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. With the introduction of new diagnostic tools, how can developers ensure that these innovations are designed with the patient's needs and experiences in mind? And obviously, that means patients ought to be involved in this early on in the development of these tools.
For sure. We want to ensure, patients have access. So that means, coverage. We also want to ensure patients can actually access it. So whether you're in a rural area or an urban area, you have to have patients access this. And we've had a lot of feedback that patients want less invasive tests. Biopsy is a very standard first patient journey in cancer, but some patients can't tolerate a biopsy. So can we use different tests that are less invasive? Can we use fine needle aspirates? Can we use blood draws? So definitely we're hearing patients' voices and thinking about novel innovations for future tests to make sure that they are just as specific as prior tests or even more specific, that they are faster turnaround times because patients don't want to wait for a very long time to get the answer. They want to know what's happening in their body to be put on the appropriate treatment so then they have a better success rate. And of course, clinical trials are really important because all of these, assays, companion diagnostics, they're all approved based on data. So we need patients to volunteer for clinical trials as well.
Good point. Good point. Erika, both as a research advocate and a patient yourself, you're deeply familiar with the importance of patient engagement in R&D. Can you take this further and talk about how incorporating patient insight helped in to balance scientific rigor with patient-centered care and ethical considerations?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Benjamin, and great to meet you, Dr. Robertson. Thank you to the Research America team for allowing me to speak on this. Yes, as an organization that trains research advocates, the goal of research advocacy is to add or incorporate the patient voice into research as a way to ensure that patient care, patient values, the spectrum of patient experiences, if you will, are integrated into research and the research process. As research advocates, we don't tell researchers how to do their science. That's not really our goal, or we try not to, I guess I'll say. But rather to really offer the patient perspective. And it really speaks to some of the things that Dr. Robertson just mentioned in terms of patient considerations and concerns, barriers to research, for example. So really trying to bring that patient perspective to the research process to improve the state of care for patients and hopefully to ultimately improve outcomes for as many patients as possible. So those patient considerations really exist along a continuum from barriers to trial participation, like Dr. Robertson mentioned, to easing pain and suffering, to helping to translate what researchers are doing to a less educated or less research-informed patient community, and even to informing or helping to guide the research questions that researchers are asking to begin with. And, you know, I would argue that when the patient perspective is incorporated into study design and implementation, scientific rigor actually can be increased because we can see things like greater participation in clinical trials, for example, or retention of participation in studies. And one of the things we can advocate for is a more representative sample of the patient population incorporated into research. So we're not just focusing on those that are the most able, have the most resources, have the best access to clinical research care. And also, I would say we could look at scientific rigor through scientific merit by incorporating meaningful outcomes to patients and participants. So are we asking questions? Are we doing studies in a way that are going to result in outcomes that are directly relatable to patients in the patient community? And even taking a step back and asking research questions that are most relevant to the patient community.
Excellent, excellent. You know, your work for Fight CRC encompasses lots of advocacy strategies as you've been talking about, including Research Advocacy Training and Support Program, which is known as RATS. So RATS is a unique program designed to train patients, their loved ones, and other research advocates to become the most educated patient voice at the research table. So empowering them so they can be more effective at the research table. From your perspective, what are some of the most important ways that these training programs, such as RATS, kind of bridge that gap between bench science and community participatory research programs?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question in the research space. And I would really say that, first off, at the heart of research advocacy is, and research advocacy training is to build trust and transparency and accountability between the research and patient communities. I like to think of it as getting everyone on the same team. Through our program, our research advocacy training and support program, our advocates get exposure to research in a variety of settings. So from benchtop science to clinical research and trials, even pharma development and studies. You know, keep in mind that we're talking about a community of advocates who are typically patients or caregivers. They're not necessarily, most of them are not trained research scientists. So exposure to research in the research process is an important way of bridging that gap in understanding and building that trust and transparency. We have partnerships to expose our advocates to science in many of these different arenas. But I would say that these partnerships are actually a form of advocacy in and of themselves. So just as our research advocates are not necessarily well-versed in science and the scientific process, researchers aren't always well-versed in the patient side of research either. So we're really trying to bring people together for both sides to see the other side, if you will. So we hold convenings that serve to educate our advocates and the researchers, really helping to tie the researchers to a why, you know, why do this work? Why ask these questions? Why look for these innovations? And a really specific goal of our research advocacy training program is to encourage researchers to engage socially responsible practices, so such that their results can really apply to everyone, regardless of their demographics, of their social determinants of health, really bring the faces and stories of the patient to the researchers to help remind them of, you know, why it's important to incorporate the patient perspective in all areas of research.
You know, something you just said was talking about really getting the patient voice into this, into the conversation. But as you know, research is a continuum. They go from these large clinical studies to small studies and even case studies to some degree. Can you talk a little bit about the continuum of your involvement throughout the spectrum of types of research that we have?
Absolutely. You know, at FICRC, through our advocacy training program, we really try to honor the stories and areas of passion of our advocates they come with a range of interests, a range of passions, a range of experiences, and many of them are very passionate about advocating for their own experiences or experiences of friends, for example. And so there really are endless opportunities ranging from some of the things that you just mentioned, academic institutions working with federal agencies. And those high-profile targets are certainly the focus for many advocacy groups, and we will not shy away from them. But we also don't want potential advocates to think that those are the only avenues that matter. We also recognize that we really need advocates in the patient voice across all arenas to have the biggest, deepest, broadest impact. So there are also, barriers to participation across that spectrum as well. Some of our advocates, they're patients themselves, and many are undergoing treatment at the time. They, aren't necessarily going to want or be able to travel for participating in maybe some Washington, D.C., centered panels, for example. But yet they're really passionate about what they do. And so we also encourage advocates who are passionate to get involved locally and to really hone in on, for example, community healthcare advocacy. So Dr. Robertson mentioned rural communities, which is a great area of opportunity for people living in rural areas to help target the specific needs and concerns of the people living in those areas. It's really ground level work, and it's really important. So we don't necessarily place a value on where in the spectrum our advocates work. Our goal and our role is to really help facilitate them in advocating wherever they feel they can either best serve or are best able to participate. We have advocates who do serve on NCI, DoD boards. We also have advocates who work through their local institutional review boards as well. We also have advocates who are involved in clinical trial review, looking at proposals, looking at protocols, offering the patient perspective. We have advocates who also work with pharma to look over the, proposals for some of their studies as well. So lots of layers of and levels of participation. We also support advocates to engage with researchers directly by going to conferences. Some present posters with patient perspectives on things like time toxicity or financial stress, access to healthcare, for example. And some of those poster presentations have resulted in collaborations with academic researchers, and they've co-authored papers together addressing the role of research advocates in their research. So again, just a really wide range of opportunities for research advocates to engage in the research process. We are building this community more and more all the time, and that's offering mentorship opportunities where we have more experienced veteran advocates able to mentor other advocates as they get started in their advocacy work. And we do try to help support them financially when we can. And we also give them the tools to advocate for compensation themselves as they're working in the advocacy space.
Great, great. Dr. Robertson, can you build on that trust issue that Erika brought up? Obviously, I would assume having a better understanding of the diagnostic testing that's available really helps patients trust their clinical course.
Yeah, so I have to +1 everything that Erika just mentioned. It's bidirectional communication. Like, we give a lot of information out, but we take a lot of information in from throughout the patient journey. So we are at these advocacy meetings. We are listening to, patients' complaints, what their wish lists are, what we can do better. And we take all of that information in, when we're starting to think about a clinical trial from the very beginning of the end result is to have a better outcome for the patient. But we also want it to be easier on the patient too. I mean, it's hard enough going through cancer journey as is. Like, where can we make steps easier? So we are listening to feedback all the time, and we encourage, patients to use your voice. I think that's probably one of their biggest powers that they can use. Inform yourself, ask questions, be really curious. Like, when you go to your provider, your oncologist, your clinician, start asking questions about, like, what are biomarkers? How do we use them? What other offers are there? Is there just one, type of test? Are there other tests? Because we're providing clinicians this information, and we need it to disseminate, to the patients. So we definitely are advocates of find out about clinical trials, start asking questions, and provide us feedback. We're at these meetings, pull us aside and tell us, what you're looking for. We hear these things and we do listen to them. It's a long journey to create a diagnostic test. It's never short. Clinical trials are very long, but each iteration that we can have a small improvement, I think there's a downstream effect. And if we help some people, that'll have an exponential effect on our next assays that we're creating that are a little bit easier, a little bit quicker, a little more sensitive. So we really do want that input from patients.
Excellent. This really is a really exciting time for the amount of new technologies that are out there. They both improve the speed and cost of innovation. Can you talk about some of the more exciting innovations you see in the diagnostic space that we think will translate into patient benefit? And then also maybe talk a little bit about how patients are involved.
Definitely. I think COVID brought to light the importance of testing. I mean, how many people before COVID knew what a rapid antigen at-home test was? Like, people didn't know what tests were. Biomarkers were very much in the background. You heard about pharma and the therapy, and there was very little attention to pay that there was, a test that goes with a lot of things. So I think that was one of the silver linings of COVID, that it brought to the forefront biomarker testing. And I think there's a lot of exciting things going on in the future. Multi-cancer early detection, MCED tests. I don't know how many people have heard about them, but it's really a cool technology where it's a type of liquid biopsy with the goal to catch early cancer cells way before symptoms appear. And they're going to use, machine learning algorithms, and these tests will be identify the origin of tumors based on different profiles of the DNA and protein. And we know that early diagnosis enables timely treatment, which leads to improved survival rates and better patient outcomes. And this can also lead to more targeted treatment. So once a doctor has a blood sample, the lab will use advanced technologies and test to study the DNA. And if any abnormalities are located, they're analyzed further. So having this genomic information really would allow a doctor to administer precise therapies that are potentially more effective. These, of course, are not FDA approved yet. There's lots and lots of studies going on. There's some CLIA labs available. So again, we need patients to participate and be active in these new innovations. And I think another exciting technology is in Alzheimer's disease. This is a space that's moving really quickly, and there is significant patient impact with Alzheimer's disease. So there's two areas that I would like to highlight. Digital tools. Digital tools are going to be incredible, and blood-based biomarkers. So what's really neat about digital tools is you'll have the potential to detect, say, cognitive dysfunction earlier by assessing the patient in their home, which will lead to earlier evaluation and ultimately potentially earlier diagnosis and treatment. And then with blood-based biomarkers, they'll have the ability to provide really objective determination of the patient's amyloid status. So I'm not sure how many people are familiar, but it can take 2 to 3 years after symptoms to begin to receive a formal Alzheimer's diagnosis currently. So having the ability to detect earlier will really have profound impacts on the patient. And I think what's really interesting in Alzheimer's is that the patients are involved throughout the whole patient journey and in clinical studies. In addition, the Alzheimer's caregiver actually has a really unique role. So they're not patients themselves, but they are a lot of the people involved close to the patient where they're starting to detect things. And we really need their help as well. And they have a really unique role, and they're also involved throughout the whole patient journey.
That's neat. That's neat. We talk a little bit about patient involvement. And of course, a diagnostic test is as good as the sensitivity and the specificity. Um, there are not a lot of tests out there that, if it turns blue, it's positive. If it turns red, it's negative. If it doesn't do anything at all, it could be either one. How do we do a better job of making sure that patients understand the results that they're given? Maybe, Erika, if I can start with you and then go to Katie.
Oh, that's a great question. I think it in part goes back to something we both mentioned around just translation and communicating. And that's another place where research advocates, patient advocates have a role, right, is in seeing the information and materials that are disseminated to patients about any particular diagnostic test or disease. Is the language clear enough? Are people able to understand it? Yeah, I think it's a real challenge, and I think it probably is going to be a multifaceted answer in terms of how do we get information to patients, clinicians, advertising campaigns, local community hospital initiatives. There's lots of ways in which we can get information about diagnostic tests and their results to patients. I know that one of the things about this testing space that has come up in a lot of conversations I've had recently is with the pivot to purely electronic communication now, patient portals, and getting our results online before we're even able to talk to our physicians, sometimes causes a lot of confusion. So I think that's an area where patient advocates, research advocates, and really the entire healthcare ecosystem can do a better job of, how do we mitigate that? How do we keep someone from reading their results on a Friday and freaking out and not getting their, getting a full explanation until Monday, right? So there's a lot of room for thinking about, how could we even interface with, I don't think patient portals are probably going to go away, but how can we, better interface with those so that patients have information that they can understand, maybe even without a Google search, because that's what people will probably resort to.
Gotcha. Katie, your thoughts?
I agree with that. Everyone becomes a Google MD, searching what it is, and it's always the worst case scenario. And, we don't want that. We want data, we want scientific facts, we want clearness. So I'm a big advocate of having reports that are in a language people can understand. So there's a lot of medical jargon, there's a lot of acronyms, scary words, and it's really important to dilute it down to understand, to speak at like the patient's level. And I'm a big advocate of, if you need to bring a notebook and ask questions, bring it in. If you need a translator, bring it in. Like, we have to also advocate for ourselves, and don't be afraid to, ask the questions. Bring a friend in, because they're a second set of ears, because you're going to hear some stuff, they're going to hear something else. But it's really important that, reports, if anyone has seen like an NGS report, they're like very, very long. So we need, executive summaries in plain language that are very, very clear and detailed.
That's neat. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time together, but let me get some closing thoughts from our panelists. As we move forward, it's clear that patient engagement and advocacy across the R&D pipeline comes in many, many, many forms. So from each of your perspectives, if you had to take away one thing from today's discussion, what would that be? Maybe I'll start with you, Erika.
In the hot seat the top. Actually, I'm going to lead with something positive. I'm really encouraged by Dr. Robertson's comments around really taking the patient perspective into consideration for their work. And I think the more that we can have these kinds of conversations in these spaces and beyond, and the more we can work together, I think everybody benefits. I think the research community benefits, innovation benefits, patients and caregivers benefit as well.
I will second an optimistic outlook. I'm really excited for all the innovation that's coming in the future with, machine learning, digital pathology, algorithms. And I think it's going to be a really exciting time for this bi-directional communication for us from, a vendor perspective to understand the patient's needs of what they don't get, what do they get, what is their barriers, what are their challenges, what do they need more from us, because it's moving at such a quick rate. I don't know if anyone can keep up with it, even scientists ourselves, it's so fast. So I think with this rapid uptake of innovation and technology, it's going to be important to pause and understand, like, what is the community hearing? What do they need to make sure that people are going to be comfortable with the new tests that are coming out?
That's great to hear. Look, this has been a really fun and insightful contribution today to our forum. I really enjoyed talking with both of you. I also want to thank our audience for joining us today. We have another session coming, so stay tuned. That session is on mental health and the ripple effect, navigating comorbidities, in just a few moments. You can access our next session in the lobby of the Zoom events platform. I want to thank again to our panelists and to our audience, and I hope you will enjoy the rest of the 2024 National Health Research Forum. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.